The morning started like any other on the crystal world of Zephoria Prime. High Commander Velthok stood in his command center, watching the peaceful flow of information from across the galaxy. For 3,000 years, the Zephyrian Council had kept peace among 12 different alien species. Their worlds were perfect places where nothing bad ever happened. Velthek's body was made of living crystal that caught the light and made rainbow patterns on the walls. He had lived for over 800 years and had never seen a real war. The worst thing he had ever dealt with was a trade dispute between two mining colonies. The communication officer, a tall blue creature named Visus, worked at her station with 6 graceful arms. Her people could speak without words, talking directly into each other's minds. She had been monitoring the usual reports from the outer worlds when something changed. Commander Thesis said, her voice carrying a strange tone. "I am receiving an unusual signal from the Rim territories." Velthok turned his attention to her. The Rim territories were the farthest worlds from the center of their space. Not much happened out there except mining and farming. What kind of signal? Thesis touched her controls, and the message played through the room's speakers. The voice was broken and full of static, but the fear in it was clear. "This is Colony 7. It's under attack. ... Unknown species. ... Massive fleets. ... Came from nowhere. ... Entire colonies are gone. They consume everything in their path. Please send help. ... We cannot stop them." Wait. The message cut off into silence. Velthek felt something he had never experienced before. His crystal body actually grew colder as fear touched him for the first time in his long life. "When did this message arrive?" he asked. "Just now, Commander. But according to the transmission data, it was sent 3 days ago." 3 days. If the message had taken 3 days to reach them, then whatever was attacking the Rim world was already much closer than when the signal was sent. Velthek's mind, trained for centuries to handle peaceful problems, struggled to understand what this meant. He called for an emergency meeting of the Council. Within an hour, representatives from all 12 species had gathered in the Great Hall. They came in all shapes and sizes. Some walked on legs, others floated in the air. Some had scales, others had fur, and a few were made of pure energy. The hall itself was a wonder of their civilization, made from materials that bent light and sound. It allowed perfect communication between species that had evolved on completely different worlds. The ceiling showed a map of their galaxy, with thousands of green dots marking their peaceful worlds. "Fellow council members," Velthok began, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall, "we face something we have not seen in our recorded history. A known enemy has attacked our outer colonies." A ripple of concern moved through the gathered beings. Counselor Keth, whose people looked like walking trees, spoke first. "Unknown enemy? We have records of every species in our galaxy. How can there be an unknown enemy?" "That is what we must find out," Velthok replied. "But first, we must protect our people." The debate that followed showed just how unprepared they were for war. These beings had spent centuries perfecting art, science, and philosophy. They had created medicines that could heal any wound and machines that could build anything they needed. But they had forgotten how to fight. Some council members wanted to send negotiators to talk with the attackers. Others suggested offering them empty worlds if they would just leave their colonies alone. A few thought they should simply move their people away from the Rim territories and let the attackers have those worlds. Velthok listened to all of this with growing frustration. Finally, he stood up, and his crystal body flashed with bright light to get everyone's attention. "We will not abandon our people," he declared. "We will not give up our worlds to invaders. We will fight." The word fight seemed strange coming from beings who had not fought anyone in thousands of years. But they all agreed. They would gather their greatest fleet and go to defend their colonies. Over the next week, ships gathered at Zephyria Prime. They came from every world in the council space. Each ship was a work of art, beautiful and powerful. The smallest was the size of a city, and the largest was like a small moon. They had energy weapons that could destroy asteroids and shields, could stop anything they had ever faced. 200 ships assembled, crewed by the finest minds from across their civilization. Scientists, engineers, and the few military officers, they still had all worked together to prepare for their mission. They were confident that their superior technology and intelligence would easily handle whatever primitive species had emerged from the outer darkness. The fleet's weapons could destroy entire planets. Their computers could calculate the movement of every star in the galaxy. Their medical facilities could bring someone back from the edge of death. Surely no enemy could stand against such power. As they prepared to leave, something unexpected happened. The communication officers detected a new signal coming from a completely different direction. This one was not a cry for help or a message. A fear. It was clear and strong, though it used radio frequencies that seemed almost ancient. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Earth vessel Horizon," the message said. "We received your distress call and are responding to assist. Please identify yourselves and provide coordinates for rendezvous." The council members looked at each other with confusion. Earth had never heard of such a world. Horizon. There was no record of this ship in any of their databases. The message was in a language they had never encountered before, though their computers quickly learned to translate it. "Where is this signal coming from?" Belthek asked. The Sis worked at her controls, her 6 arms moving in complex patterns. "The signal originates from a small vessel approximately 50,000 kilometers from our position. It appears to be heading directly toward us." "How small?" "Approximately 300 meters in length, Commander. Single-hull design with what appears to be primitive chemical propulsion systems." The council members began to whisper among themselves. "Ship only 300 meters long?" Their smallest vessels were at least 10 times that size. In chemical propulsion, it moved beyond such crude technology millennia ago. "Are they offering to help us?" asked Counselor Zeph, whose people resembled giant insects with golden shells. "It would appear so," this is replied, "though I cannot understand how such a small vessel from an unknown species could provide assistance to our fleet." Valthak found himself curious about these strangers. In all their years of peace, they had catalogued every known species in the galaxy. How had they missed an entire civilization? And what kind of beings would fly through space in such a small, primitive ship? "Open a channel," he ordered. "Let us speak with these ... humans." As the communication link opened, Velthok prepared to politely decline their offer of help. What could one tiny ship possibly do that his mighty fleet could not? But something about the voice in that message made him pause. There had been no fear in it, no uncertainty. It's a simple statement of fact. "We received your distress call and are responding to assist." It had been spoken like someone who had done this before, like someone who knew what it meant to answer. A call for help in the darkness of space. That seemed impossible. But Velthak found himself wondering what kind of world would produce beings who would race toward danger instead of away from it. The horizon was still approaching their position, and soon they would have their first meeting with these mysterious humans. Velthok did not know it yet, but this encounter would change everything. The galaxy was about to meet a species that had been forged in fire and conflict. Beings who understood that sometimes the only way to preserve peace was to be willing to fight for it. The distress signal had been answered, but not by the saviors anyone had expected. The human ship Horizon looked nothing like the beautiful vessels of the Council fleet, where the alien ships curved and flowed like works of art. The Horizon was all straight lines and hard angles. Its hull was dark metal covered in small dents and scratches. Strange symbols were painted on its side in white letters that spelled out words the aliens had never seen before. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship, looking at the massive alien fleet through the main screen. At 42 years old, he had short brown hair starting to turn gray at the edges and tired eyes that had seen too many battles. His uniform was practical and worn, nothing like the flowing robes and crystal armor of the alien commanders. "Holy cow," whispered Lieutenant Commander Ryan Torres from his position at the weapons console. "Look at the size of those ships. Each one could probably hold our entire fleet back home." Chief Engineer Lisa Parker looked up from her station where she was running checks on their systems. "Captain, our weapons are going to look like toys compared to what they have. We've got railguns and nuclear warheads. They probably have stuff that can blow up stars." Morrison nodded but kept his expression calm. Size isn't everything, Lisa. Let's see what they have to say first. The communication came through on their main screen. The image showed a being made of what looked like living crystal, tall and elegant, with light dancing through its body in beautiful patterns. When it spoke, its voice was like music, but the computer translated the words into English. Greetings, Vessel Horizon. I am High Commander Velthak of the Zephyrian Council. I appreciate your offer of assistance, but we must ask what experience your species has with military operations. Morrison stepped forward. I'm Captain Jake Morrison. We've been fighting wars for about as long as we've existed as a species. We're currently in a peaceful period, but our last major conflict ended only 30 years ago. There was a long pause. Morrison could see other alien beings gathering around Velthak, all of them looking confused and disturbed by his answer. You fight among yourselves, asked another alien, this one looking like a tall blue creature with multiple arms. Your own species makes war against itself. Yes, ma'am, Morrison replied simply. We've had 2 world wars, hundreds of smaller conflicts, revolutions, civil wars. It's just part of our history. Dr. Amanda Cross, the ship's scientist, stepped up beside Morrison. She was a small woman with red hair and green eyes, wearing a lab coat over her uniform. What Captain Morrison means is that conflict has been a driving force in human development. We've learned to adapt and overcome challenges through necessity. Aliens looked even more disturbed. One of them, a creature that seemed to be made of flowing energy, spoke up. This is barbaric. Civilized species do not make war upon themselves. Maybe not, said Morrison, but it's made us good at solving problems when everything goes wrong. High Commander Velthak leaned forward. Tell us about your world. What is it like? Morrison looked at his crew, then back at the screen. Well, it's what you might call challenging. We get hurricanes that can level cities, earthquakes that split the ground open, volcanoes that can change the weather for years. We have deserts that can kill you in hours and frozen areas that can kill you in minutes. Your world has no climate control? Asked the blue alien, whose name appeared on the screen as Counselor Thysis. No climate control, confirmed Morrison. We get ice ages, heat waves, floods, droughts. We just learn to deal with it. Surely your government controls these things, pressed another alien counselor. Chief Medical Officer Dr. Helen Grant, an older woman with gray hair, laughed. Government? Our planet has about 200 different governments, and they don't agree on much of anything. Can't even get them to work together on simple things, let alone control the weather. The silence that followed was so complete that Morrison could hear the quiet hum of his ship's engines. The aliens were staring at them like they were looking at creatures from another universe. 200 governments? Velthak finally asked. On one world, give or take, Morrison said. Sometimes they merge, sometimes they split up. Sometimes they fight each other. It keeps things interesting. Communications Officer Pete Davis, a young man with black hair, looked up from his station. Captain, I'm reading increased activity from the alien fleet. Looks like they're having some kind of emergency meeting. Morrison could see the aliens on the screen talking rapidly among themselves. Though the translation system couldn't keep up with their excited conversation, finally, Velthak turned back to face them. Captain Morrison, we would like to invite you and your officers aboard our flagship for a formal meeting. We have many questions about your species and your capabilities. We'd be honored, Morrison replied, but I should warn you, we're not much to look at compared to your people. An hour later, Morrison and 4 of his officers stood in the transport bay of the alien flagship. The ship was so large that they had to take a small shuttle just to get from the docking bay to the meeting room. Everything around them was smooth and beautiful, made from materials that seemed to glow with their own light. The meeting room was enormous, with a ceiling that showed a perfect view of the stars outside. The aliens sat around a curved table that seemed to be made from a single piece of crystal. Each alien was different from the others, representing the 12 species of the Council. Morrison's team looked tiny and rough compared to the elegant beings around them. Their uniforms were practical military gear, designed for function rather than beauty. They carried no weapons, but their bearings showed they were ready for trouble. Please, sit, Velthak said, gesturing to chairs that formed themselves from the floor. "We have much to discuss." Dr. Cross pulled out a small tablet and began making notes. "If I may ask, how long have your species been at peace?" "The Council has maintained peace for over 3,000 years, replied Counselor Keth, who looked like a walking tree with golden bark. "Before that, we had occasional disputes, but nothing that could be called war." 3,000 years. Torres repeated quietly. "Captain, that's longer than recorded human history." "What about crime?" asked Dr. Grant. "Surely you have individuals who break your laws." "Crime is extremely rare," said Thesis. "Our societies have evolved beyond the need for violence. We solve disputes through discussion and compromise. And if someone doesn't want to compromise," Morrison asked. The aliens looked at each other uncertainly. Does not happen," Velthek said finally. "All rational beings understand that cooperation is better than conflict." Engineering Chief Lisa Parker leaned forward. "What about accidents, equipment failures, natural disasters?" "Our technology prevents most accidents," explained another counselor, a creature that seemed to be made of living metal. "As for natural disasters, we have controlled our world's climates for millennia. Such things do not occur." Morrison felt a growing understanding of what they were dealing with. These beings had created perfect worlds and perfect societies. It eliminated every source of conflict and challenge from their lives. In doing so, they'd also eliminated their ability to handle real danger. "Commander Velthak," Morrison said carefully, "have any of your people ever died in combat?" "Combat." Velthak's crystal body seemed to dim slightly. "We have not had combat in our recorded history. Our military forces exist only for ceremonial purposes and asteroid clearing." "What about your enemies now, these attackers from the Rim?" "Territories? We know nothing about them," Velthak admitted. "They appeared suddenly and began destroying our colonies. Our ships that attempted to engage them were consumed." "Consumed?" Torres asked sharply. "The enemy's ships appear to be organic in nature. They do not simply destroy our vessels. They absorb them, along with their crews, and grow larger." Morrison felt a chill run down his spine. He had fought many enemies in his career, but nothing that sounded like this. "How many ships have you lost?" 17 vessels with full crews. "Over 50,000 beings." The humans looked at each other. No. 50,000 dead was a tragedy, but Morrison had seen single battles on Earth that claimed more lives than that. The difference was that, for these aliens, it was unthinkable. They had lived so long in peace that they had forgotten how to process loss, Commander Morrison said quietly. "With respect, you're not ready for this fight." Velthek's crystal body flashed with anger. "We have the finest technology in the galaxy. Our ships are superior to anything we have ever encountered." "Technology isn't everything," Dr. Grant said gently. "You need people who know how to use it under pressure." "People? Who can make hard choices when everything is falling apart?" "And you believe you are such people?" asked Thesis. Morrison looked around the beautiful room at the perfect beings surrounding them. "Ma'am, we're from a world that's been trying to kill us since the day we crawled out of the oceans. We fought wars against each other, against our own planet, and against every challenge that's ever come our way. We've lost more battles than you've ever fought, and we're still here. But you are so few," Velthek said. "One small ship against an enemy that has already destroyed 17 of our vessels." "Sometimes," Morrison replied, "being small is an advantage. Sometimes being desperate is better than being comfortable." The combined fleet moved through space toward the Rim territories, 200 alien ships, and one small human vessel. Captain Morrison stood on the bridge of the horizon, watching the alien fleet spread out around them. Each alien ship was a work of art, glowing with soft light and moving with perfect grace. "Captain," called out Pete Davis from the communications station, "we're getting reports from the scout ships. They've reached the outer colonies." Morrison walked over to look. At the data coming in, what he saw made his blood run cold. The images showed star systems that had once held thriving worlds, now reduced to empty space and floating debris. Entire planets had been stripped down to their cores, leaving behind only hollow shells of rock. "My God," whispered Dr. Cross. looking at the pictures. What could do this to an entire planet? Before Morrison could answer, more reports came in. The alien scout ships had found something moving in the darkness between the dead worlds. The enemy was still there, and they were bigger than anyone had imagined. High Commander Velthak's voice came over the communication system. All ships, prepare for engagement. We are about to face the enemy. Morrison looked at his crew. They were all experienced military people, but none of them had ever seen destruction on this scale. Lisa, what's our weapon status? All systems ready, Captain Parker replied from her engineering station. Oh, I'm not sure what good our little guns will do against something that can eat planets. The first visual contact came 20 minutes. Later, the enemy ships appeared on the long-range sensors as dark shapes moving through space. As they got closer, the details became clearer. Morrison felt his stomach turn. The enemy vessels were not built like normal ships. They were grown like living creatures. Dude, their hulls were black and organic, covered in what looked like scales or armor plates. A strange growth stuck out from their sides, and Morrison could see openings that might have been mouths or feeding ports. They're biological, Dr. Grant said, studying the sensor readings. These aren't machines. They're alive. The largest of the enemy ships was the size of a small moon, its surface crawling with smaller vessels that seemed to be connected to it by organic tubes. As the human and alien fleets watched, the creature ships began to move toward them with surprising speed. All ships, attack formation, Velthak ordered. Target the largest vessel first. The alien fleet moved into a perfect battle formation, their weapons charging with brilliant energy. Morrison had to admit it was beautiful to watch. The ships moved like dancers, each one taking its assigned position with grace and precision. The first energy blasts from the alien ships lit up space with colors Morrison had never seen before. The beams struck the enemy vessels and ... did almost nothing. The organic hulls seemed to absorb the energy, growing brighter and larger as they fed on the power. That's impossible, Torres said, watching the display. Those energy weapons should have destroyed anything. But the enemy ships kept coming, and now Morrison could see something that made his blood freeze. The smaller vessels were detaching from the large ones and moving toward the alien fleet. As they got closer, he could see that they were opening up, revealing mouths full of metal teeth. They're not just ships, he realized. They're predators. The first alien vessel to be attacked was a beautiful crystal ship from the Zarian fleet. The enemy creature latched onto it with organic claws and began to feed. Morrison watched in horror as the crystal ship was slowly dissolved and absorbed into the creature's body. All ships, retreat to secondary positions, Velthak ordered. But his voice was shaky with fear. The alien fleet began to pull back, but the enemy creatures followed. More ships were caught and consumed, their crews screaming over the communication. Channels before the signals went dead, Captain Dr. Cross said, studying her instruments. I'm reading massive energy signatures from the enemy ships. They're using the material from our destroyed vessels to create more creatures. Morrison felt sick. This wasn't just war. This was feeding time. The enemy didn't just want to defeat them. They wanted to consume them, to turn everything they were into more of themselves. Pete, get me a direct line to High Commander Velthak, Morrison ordered. Channel open, Captain. Commander, your energy weapons are making them stronger. Every time you hit them, they absorb the power and grow bigger. Then, what do you suggest? Velthak's voice was desperate now. Half his fleet was already gone, consumed by the hungry creatures. Morrison looked at his tactical display. The enemy was using the absorbed ships to create more of themselves, but the process took time and energy. We need to change tactics. Stop feeding them and start hurting them. How? The old-fashioned way. Physical damage, explosives, things they can't absorb. Torres looked up from his weapons console. Captain, our nuclear warheads might work. They're not energy weapons. They're just big explosions. Do it, Morrison ordered. Target the nearest enemy ship. The Horizon fired a single nuclear missile. At one of the smaller enemy creatures, the warhead struck the organic hull and detonated in a brilliant flash of light. When the explosion cleared, the creature was badly damaged, pieces of its hull floating in space. "It worked!" Torres shouted. "The creature is hurt." Morrison's celebration was short-lived. The damaged creature was already healing, absorbing debris from space to repair itself. And worse, the other creatures had noticed the attack on their companion. They were turning toward the horizon with obvious hunger. "All ships fall back," Velthok ordered. "We cannot win this fight." Morrison watched as the alien fleet began to retreat, but the enemy creatures followed. The beautiful ships of the Council were being hunted down one by one, their crews consumed by the hungry darkness. "Captain," Dr. Grant said quietly, "I'm analyzing the enemy's behavior patterns. They're not just random predators. They're organized, intelligent." "What do you mean they're using tactics?" "The larger ships hang back while the smaller ones attack. They're coordinating their movements. This isn't just feeding. This is warfare." Morrison studied the battle display. Dr. Grant was right. The enemy ships moved with purpose, cutting off escape routes and herding the alien vessels into kill zones. These creatures had done this before, many times. Pete scanned for any communication signals from the enemy ships. Davis worked at his console. For several minutes, "Captain, I'm picking up something. It's not like anything I've ever heard before." The sound that came through the speakers was like nothing Morrison had ever experienced. It was part insect buzz, part whale song, and part electronic static. But underneath it all, there was something that made his skin crawl. Intelligence, hunger, and something else. "Joy," Dr. Cross said softly. "They're enjoying this." The truth hit Morrison like a physical blow. These creatures didn't just consume other species for survival. They did it because they liked it. They had turned destruction into an art form, and they were very good at it. "How many ships have we lost?" Morrison asked Velthok over the communication channel. 97 vessels, the crystal being replied. "More than half our fleet. This is a disaster beyond anything we have ever imagined."
Oh.
Morrison looked at his small crew. They were all that stood between these creatures and the entire galaxy. The alien fleet was falling apart, their beautiful ships being consumed one by one. The enemy was growing stronger with each victory, adding the mass and energy of their victims to their own power. "Lisa, what's our ammunition status?" "We have 12 nuclear warheads left, Captain. Our railgun ammunition for maybe 10 more." Minutes of continuous fire. Morrison nodded. It wasn't much, but it was what they had. Ryan plotted a course toward the largest enemy ship. Torres looked at him with wide eyes. "Sir, that thing is the size of a small moon. We'd be flying right into its mouth." "Sometimes that's exactly where you need to be," Morrison replied. "Pete, get me a channel to the entire fleet." "Channel open." Captain Morrison took a deep breath. "This is Captain Morrison to all ships. I know this looks hopeless. I know you're scared, but I need you to listen to me very carefully. These creatures have one weakness. They're overconfident, they think. They've already won." The communication channel was silent except for the distant sounds of battle. "They've been feeding on energy weapons and growing stronger," Morrison continued. "But they've never faced anyone who is willing to get close enough to hurt them where it counts. They've never fought anyone desperate enough to do what needs to be done." "What are you suggesting?" Velthak asked. Morrison looked at his crew, then at the image of the massive enemy ship on his screen. "I'm suggesting we stop trying to fight them like civilized beings and start fighting them like the monsters they are. Sometimes the only way to kill a predator is to become something even more dangerous." The fleet hung in space, waiting for his next words. Behind them, the enemy creatures continued their slow advance, confident in their ability to consume everything in their path. They had done this to countless civilizations across the galaxy, and they expected this fight to end like all the others. But they had never encountered humans before. They had never faced a species that had learned to fight dirty, to take losses, and to keep fighting even when everything seemed hopeless. The real war was about to begin. Captain Morrison stood before the holographic display showing the remaining alien fleet. What had started as 200 magnificent ships was now down to less than 90. The beautiful vessels hung in space like wounded birds, their crews shaken by losses they had never imagined possible. Commander Velthek, Morrison said, into the communication system. I need command authority over the remaining fleet. The silence that followed was so long that Morrison wondered if the transmission had failed. Finally, Velthek's crystal form appeared on the screen. Dimmer than before, as if the defeats had drained the light from his body. You wish to command our ships? You are from a single vessel with a crew of 45 beings? Yes, sir. Right. Now, those 45 beings have more combat experience than your entire fleet combined. Morrison could see the other alien commanders appearing on split screens, their faces showing confusion and fear. These beings had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years, but they had never faced anything like this. What would you do differently? Asked Counselor this, her blue skin pale with shock. Morrison turned to his tactical officer. Ryan, show them the enemy movement patterns. Torres brought up a display showing how the Devourer ships moved and attacked. Look at this, Morrison said. They're using pack hunting tactics. The big ships stay back while the smaller ones attack. They're herding your ships into kill zones. We see the pattern, Velthek said. But how does this help us? Because they're following rules, Morrison explained. Once you know the rules, you can break them. Dr. Cross stepped forward. Captain Morrison, should I show them the biological analysis? Morrison nodded. Cross activated her own display, showing the internal structure of the enemy ships. These creatures are incredibly efficient, but they have limitations. They need time to digest what they consume. Can't process too much at once without becoming sluggish. What are you suggesting? Asked another alien commander. Morrison looked directly at Velthok. You stop fighting like you've been taught to fight. We start fighting to win. Over the next hour, Morrison explained his plan. The aliens listened with growing horror as he described tactics that went against everything they believed about civilized warfare. You want us to use our damaged ships as weapons? Counselor Keth asked, his tree-like form shaking with distress. Yes, Morrison replied simply. A ship that's going to be destroyed anyway can still do damage if you ram it into an enemy at full speed. But the crews this is protested. They're talking about deliberate sacrifice. Engineering Chief Parker spoke up. Not if we evacuate the crews first. Program the ship's computers to make the attack run. The ships are already lost. This way they can take some enemies with them. The concept of using ships as guided missiles was so alien to the council members that many couldn't even process it. They had spent millennia perfecting the art of avoiding casualties, not accepting them. There's another problem, Dr. Grant said, studying her medical readings. These creatures heal by absorbing material from space. Every ship they destroy makes them stronger. Morrison nodded, which is why we need to hit them faster than they can heal. Overwhelm their ability to process what they consume? Torres brought up another tactical display. We group the fleet into small units. Hit-and-run attacks. Strike fast, damage them, and retreat before they can respond. Make them chase us instead of hunting us. This is barbaric, said one of the alien commanders. Morrison's expression hardened. Commander, right now barbaric is the only thing that's going to keep your people alive. You can worry about being civilized after we win. The first test of Morrison's new tactics came 6 hours later. Instead of the graceful formations the aliens were used to, Morrison split the fleet into groups of 5 ships each. Each group would attack a different target, hit hard, and retreat immediately. Remember, Morrison broadcast to all ships, don't try to destroy them completely. Hurt them enough that they have to stop and heal, then move on to the next target. The first attack group was led by Morrison himself in the horizon. They approached a medium-sized Devourer ship that was feeding on the remains of a destroyed alien vessel. The creature was distracted, focused on absorbing the metal and energy from its meal. All ships, target the creature's feeding appendages, Morrison ordered. Don't let it finish eating. The attack was swift and brutal. Nuclear warheads and kinetic projectiles struck the creature's vulnerable feeding organs, tearing them away from its body. The creature screamed, a sound that came through space itself, and tried to turn toward its attackers. Retreat now, Morrison ordered, and the attack group scattered in different directions. The wounded creature tried to follow, but it was bleeding organic fluid into space and had to stop to seal its wounds. More importantly, it had lost its meal and had to start healing instead of growing stronger. It worked, Torres called out. The creature is damaged and not pursuing. Similar attacks were happening across the battlefield. Small groups of ships would strike quickly at feeding creatures, interrupt their meals, and retreat before the larger ships could respond. It was like watching a pack of wolves attacking a herd of cattle, but the aliens were finally learning to use their speed against the enemy's size. "This is highly irregular," Veltok complained over the communication channel. "Our ships are not designed for such chaotic tactics." "Your ships weren't designed for survival either," Morrison replied. "But they're learning." It's a real breakthrough. Came when Morrison implemented what he called the bait-and-switch tactic. Dr. Cross had discovered that the Devourer's ships became more aggressive when they sensed damaged vessels, believing them to be easy prey. "We're going to fake being heavily damaged," Morrison explained to a group of alien commanders. "Make them think we're helpless, then hit them when they come to feed." The plan required one alien ship to deliberately damage its own systems too, appear crippled. The captain who volunteered was a young Zarian officer named Keth, whose crystal body flickered with nervous energy. "I don't understand how pretending to be weak helps us win," Keth said. Morrison smiled grimly. "Because predators get careless when they think their prey is helpless. And careless predators make mistakes." The trap worked perfectly. When Keth's ship appeared to be drifting helplessly, 3 smaller Devourer ships broke formation and moved in to feed. But as soon as they latched onto the ship, hidden weapons ports opened, and nuclear warheads detonated inside the creatures' mouths. The explosions tore the attackers apart from the inside, and their remains floated in space instead of being absorbed into the enemy fleet. For the first time since the battle began, the alien forces had actually reduced the enemy's numbers. "Magnificent," breathed Velthok. "The creatures are dead, not just damaged." "That's the idea," Morrison said. "But this is just the beginning." Over the following days, Morrison taught the alien fleet tactics that their civilized minds could barely comprehend. He showed them how to use asteroids as cover, how to fake retreat to draw enemies into traps, and how to coordinate attacks to overwhelm the creature's healing abilities. Most shocking of all, he taught them about acceptable losses. Commander Morrison said to Velthak during one of their strategy meetings, "You need to understand that some ships are going to be destroyed, some crews are going to die. That's the price of war." Velthak's crystal body dimmed. "Cannot simply accept the death of our people." "You're not accepting it," Morrison replied. "You're using it. Every ship that dies, taking an enemy with it, saves 10 other ships. Every crew that sacrifices themselves saves 1,000 others." Dr. Grant added, "Captain Morrison isn't saying life doesn't matter. He's saying that sometimes the best way to protect life is to risk it." The aliens struggled with these concepts, but they learned they had no choice. The alternative was extinction. The turning point came when Morrison convinced the fleet to attempt something that terrified the alien commanders more than facing the Devourers themselves. He wanted them to board an enemy ship. "You want us to go inside one of those creatures?" Thises asked, her voice shaking. "We need to understand how they work," Morrison explained. "How they communicate, how they reproduce, how they can be stopped permanently." The boarding mission was led by Morrison himself, along with volunteers from both human and alien crews. They used a damaged Devourer ship that had been stunned by repeated attacks. Cutting their way through its organic hull with plasma torches, inside, they found horrors beyond imagination. The ship was alive, its corridors pulsing like arteries, its walls covered in what looked like digestive fluids. Worse, they found the remains of consumed crews, partially absorbed into the creature's body, but still alive and aware. "Dear God," whispered Dr. Cross, scanning one of the victims with her medical equipment. "They don't just kill them, they keep them conscious while they digest them." Morrison felt a cold rage building inside him. These creatures weren't just predators, they were torturers, keeping their victims alive to maximize their suffering. "Download everything," he ordered Torres, who was interfacing with what looked like the creature's nervous system. "I want to know how these things think." The final battle began 3 months after Morrison had taken command of the alien fleet. In that time, the humans had transformed the Council's forces from a ceremonial parade into a hardened war machine. The beautiful ships now bore scars from countless battles, their hulls marked with symbols that the aliens had learned from humans. Kill marks, unit insignias, and memorials for the fallen. High Commander Velthak stood on the bridge of his flagship, but he was no longer the same being. Who had started this war? His crystal body was darker now, marked with stress fractures that would never fully heal. He had learned what it meant to make hard choices, to send friends to their deaths, and to carry the weight of command in wartime. Captain Morrison Velthak said over the communication channel, "The scouts report that we have found their main base." Morrison looked at the tactical display showing what the humans had nicknamed the nursery. It was a massive structure built from the consumed remains of entire star systems, writhing mass of organic technology that stretched across space for millions of kilometers. Smaller devourer ships moved around it like insects around a hive. How many ships are we looking at? Morrison asked. Torres studied his sensors. At least 500 enemy vessels, Captain. Maybe more, in that central structure. It's the size of a small planet. Dr. Cross looked up from her analysis station. Captain, I'm reading massive biological activity from the central structure. It's not just a base, it's a breeding facility. They're creating new ships in there. Morrison felt the familiar cold feeling in his stomach that came before every major battle. How long until they finish? Based on the energy readings, maybe 6 months? But Captain, the new ships they're building, they're bigger than anything we've seen before. Morrison nodded grimly. The Devourers were preparing for their final assault on the galaxy's core worlds. If those new ships were completed, nothing would be able to stop them. All fleet commanders report to the horizon for final briefing, Morrison ordered an hour later. The command staff from the surviving ships gathered in the horizon's small meeting room. The faces around the table showed the changes that months of war had brought. The aliens had learned to carry themselves like soldiers, their elegant forms now bearing the practical equipment of warriors. Ladies and gentlemen, Morrison began, we have one chance to end this war. The enemy has concentrated their forces to protect their breeding facility. If we can destroy it, we can stop them from creating more ships. Counselor, this is her blue. Skin, now marked with battle scars, leaned forward. What do you propose, Captain? Morrison activated a holographic display showing the nursery structure. We're going to infiltrate the facility and destroy it from the inside. Plant nuclear charges in the breeding chambers and detonate them simultaneously. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of what he was suggesting. Captain, said Commander Keth. The young Zarian, who had volunteered for the first suicide mission? That facility is surrounded by hundreds of enemy ships. How do we get close enough? Morrison looked around the table at the faces of beings who had become his friends and comrades. We don't all get close. Most of the fleet will engage the enemy ships in a frontal assault, draw their attention away from the facility. A distraction, Velthak said, understanding immediately. While the enemy is focused on the battle, a small team infiltrates the structure. Exactly, but the team going inside, ... They won't be coming back. Dr. Grant spoke quietly. The nuclear charge is required to destroy something that size would have to be detonated manually. The organic interference would prevent remote detonation. Morrison nodded. The infiltration team will be volunteers only. No one is ordered to go on this mission. Without hesitation, every hand in the room went up. Morrison felt a lump in his throat. These beings who had known only peace for thousands of years were now volunteering for certain death to save their galaxy. I'll take 12 people, Morrison said. Small enough to move fast, large enough to plant all the charges. Captain, Velthak said, I volunteer to lead the mission.
Ow.
Respect, Commander. I'm leading this one myself. You have already given us victory, Captain Morrison. You have taught us how to fight, how to win. Let me do this. Morrison shook his head. This is a human-style mission, Commander.
Yes.
It requires someone who's comfortable with desperate odds and impossible situations. The final team consisted of Morrison, half his human crew, volunteers from each alien species. Dr. Cross insisted on coming to analyze the breeding facility. Torres volunteered to handle the technical aspects of planting the charges. Even Dr. Grant joined the mission, saying that someone needed to document what they found for future generations. The battle began at dawn, ship time. The alien fleet, now numbering only 60 vessels, attacked the Devourer forces with everything they had learned about human warfare. Gone were the elegant formations and precise energy weapons. Instead, they fought like Morrison had taught them: dirty, desperate, determined. The Devourers responded exactly as Morrison had predicted. Seeing what they thought was the last desperate assault of a defeated enemy, they threw everything they had at the attacking fleet. The massive ships moved to engage, leaving the nursery structure with minimal protection. In the chaos of battle, Morrison's small team slipped through the defenses in a modified alien shuttle. The craft had been stripped of everything except engines and life support, then coated with organic material taken from destroyed Devourer ships to mask their presence. "We're inside their sensor perimeter," Torres reported. "The organic camouflage is working." The nursery structure grew larger. On their screens as they approached, up close, it was even more horrifying than the long-range scans had suggested. The surface was covered with openings that pulsed like breathing holes, and Morrison could see movement inside new Devourer ships in various stages of growth. "There," Dr. Cross said, pointing to a large opening, "that's a main artery. We can follow it to the breeding chambers." The shuttle slipped inside the structure, moving through passages that felt more like blood vessels than corridors. The walls around them pulsed with life, and Morrison could hear sounds that made his skin crawl, a constant whisper of organic processes at work. They found the breeding chambers deep inside the structure. The sight that greeted them was beyond description. Hundreds of new Devourer ships hung in organic sacks, nearly ready for birth. Each one was larger than the biggest ships they had faced before, designed for nothing but destruction and consumption. "Plant the charges," Morrison ordered. "We have 20 minutes before the enemy realizes what we're doing." The team spread out through the chamber, placing nuclear devices at key structural points. The work was dangerous. The organic walls reacted to their presence, trying to trap them or alert the structure's defenses. Captain Dr. Cross called out, "You need to see this." Morrison followed her to a section of the chamber where the walls were transparent. Inside, he could see the remains of consumed civilizations, not just individuals, but entire cultures preserved in organic suspension. The Devourers kept samples of every species they had destroyed, like trophies of their conquests. "They've done this before," Dr. Cross said, her voice shaking. "Hundreds of times, maybe thousands." Morrison felt a cold rage settle over him. These creatures hadn't just attacked the rim colonies. They had been doing this across the galaxy for millennia, wiping out entire civilizations and keeping pieces of them as reminders of their victories. "All charges planted," Torres reported. "Detonation in 5 minutes. Team, extract to the shuttle," Orson ordered. But as they moved toward their escape route, alarms began to sound throughout the structure. The organic walls started to close, sealing off the passages. The nursery had finally realized it was under attack. "Captain, we're trapped," Dr. Grant said. "The exit is sealed." Morrison looked at his team, humans and aliens who had become closer than family through months of war. They all knew what this meant. "Can we still detonate the charges?" he asked Torres. "Yes, sir. Manual detonation from here." Morrison activated his communication system one last time. "Hi, Commander Velthak. This is Captain Morrison. Mission accomplished. Tell them we were here. Tell them we fought." Velthak's voice came back, strained with emotion. "Captain, you have given us more than victory. You have given us understanding. We will remember." Morrison looked around at his team one last time. "Any regrets?" Dr. Cross smiled, despite the tears in her eyes. "We saved the galaxy, Captain. I can't think of a better way to go." Torres nodded. "It's been an honor, sir." Dr. Grant added, "Humanity will be remembered for this. All of us will." Morrison placed his hand on the detonation control. "For everyone who couldn't fight back. For every civilization these creatures destroyed. For the future we're giving our children. The nuclear charges detonated simultaneously, tearing the nursery apart from the inside. The massive structure collapsed in on itself, taking with it the future of the devourer species. Without their breeding facility, remaining creatures could not replace their losses or create new ships. The battle above ended within hours. The surviving devourer ships, cut off from their hive mind and unable to reproduce, fled back to the dark spaces. Between galaxies,